One of my most vivid childhood memories takes place in Montgomery, Alabama, which is where my grandparents lived and where my mother was raised. I grew up in a town called Birmingham, Alabama. Now, I'll explain to you, for those who might be geographically challenged for the United States, the way I explained it when I was in Israel for the first time when I was 15 to my Israeli cab driver. Alabama is right above Florida, to the right of Texas, and just under New York. It's the deep South if you live in the States. And my parents used to take us to Montgomery almost every other weekend to spend time with my grandparents. And when we were there, my grandparents would take me to downtown Montgomery, where my grandfather ran the Red Bell Cafe, and my great Uncle Max owned the pawn shop. It was just called Max's Pawn Shop. My grandmother and her sister Regina, who we called Gigi affectionately, worked there 6 days a week. And they would let me come and look at all of the treasures that you can only find in a pawn shop. And when I was about 11 years old, my grandmother said, "You are finally ready to work behind the counter. We're going to let you get behind here and service the customers and let you take the lead, but you know, the customer is always right. Remember that." I said, "Yes, ma'am." And my first customer came in, and she was beautiful. She had a large rabbit fur coat. It was 1981, you know, and a giant gold tooth in the front that I was just mesmerized by. And as she started to peruse all of the jewelry section, I said, "Ma'am, is there something I can show you?" And she said, "Yes, I would like to see that donkey." I said, "Of course." And I looked down, and I started to get nervous because I did not see a donkey. And I looked up at my grandmother, and she gave me a knowing nod. And I said, "Yes, ma'am, I would love to show you that donkey. Could you show me which one you're talking about?" And she said, "The donkey right there, the gold donkey pendant." And I said, "Yes, ma'am." And I looked down, and she was pointing to a chai, mistaking the yud on the chai for the donkey's head and the chet for its legs. Now, I was then at the Birmingham Jewish Day School, and I certainly knew what a chai looked like, and felt like an obligation to tell this woman what it really was. But then I looked at my grandmother again, who gave me again a knowing nod. And I said, "Yes, ma'am, I would be happy to show you that beautiful gold donkey pendant." Sadly, that was not my first sale, as she did not buy the donkey chai pendant. But it was a very critical lesson for me at that young age. I learned two things that day. Number one, it is more important to be kind than to be right. And number two, beauty really is in the eye of the beholder. I love these sort of stories, whether they're mine or someone else's. I consider myself a curator of these stories. And when I was in Israel this past summer with my dear friend Cheryl Brownstein, we got to hear from so many people who reminded us of the power of story. One time we were listening to two immigrants to Israel who had been here for 20 years, been in Israel for more than 20 years. Ma'areta from Ethiopia and Ina from the Ukraine. And as Ina told her story, we were all wrapped with attention. And then Ma'areta told her story about traveling in the Sudan for weeks and living in a refugee camp. And before we could go on to more questions, Ina stopped her and said, "Ma'areta, I've known you for years, and I've never heard your story. I've never heard your story." And she looked at us and said, "This is so important because I've known her and yet haven't known her story. And if we're to become one nation, we must know each other's stories." Days later, we were in Bnei Brak, a Haredi community, with the highest percentage of Haredi men and women who are now being trained to go out into the workforce. And we listened to three men talk, and one was a gentleman named Raphael who talked about the struggle of staying true to his Haredi culture, but also living in a multicultural world where he wanted to work. And as he met others who faced the same dilemma, he said, "All of a sudden it hit me, I was not alone, because their story was my story, and my story was their story." Now, my story takes place in the South of the United States, and you might wonder, what is it like? Well, it's very similar to Vancouver. As Giddy said, I was the one shopping and being a tourist today. And I just had to take in the magnificence of this gorgeous city and realize you are sort of like the South. It feels very familiar. People are nice. We sometimes get made fun of for our accents. Okay, there's no hockey in Birmingham or in Chattanooga where I live, but besides the hockey, there is this familiarity. I'm sure the same thing happened to you too. When I was growing up in the South, everybody knew everybody. And my parents had 2 rules for dating. Number 1, find out if the boy was Jewish. Number 2, please find out if we're related to him. The answer to number 2 didn't really matter. My grandparents were third cousins. But the point is that it was about family. And if you believe in the Federation, you believe in this concept of family. It's like Alex said, you believe that there are people not only in Vancouver, not only in Canada, but around the world that we are responsible for, that we must take care of, whether we know them or not, whether we meet them one day or not. Kol Yisrael Aravim Zel Hazeh, all of Israel is responsible for one another. It's what I love so much about being Jewish. It's why we play Jewish geography. We want to feel connected to each other. And in Judaism, there are very specific definitions of our philanthropy. There's this idea of charity and also benevolence. Charity being this idea that we give because we feel guilty, an obligation. Benevolence because we give from the heart. They say charity awaits the cry of distress. Benevolence anticipates it. We anticipate the cry of distress. You saw it in the video. It's why we're there when someone is hungry, when someone's in need, when someone is lost, when someone is attacked. We're there when it happens because you know what? We were there the day before and the year before. We anticipate it. We are community. I realized the power of this years ago. We have 3 boys who are now in their teenage years, but when they were in elementary school, my husband all of a sudden had a panic attack in the kitchen saying, I don't think the boys know Hatikva. And I thought of this as I was listening to Maya so beautifully sing the Canadian anthem and then Hatikva, the anthem of our people. And I said, well, I don't know if they know the Hatikva. I haven't taught it to them. Have you? He said, no, I haven't taught them. We haven't taught them Hatikva. Oh my gosh, what are we doing? So our oldest at the time walked in the kitchen and my husband said, I will give you $20 if you can sing Hatikva. I'm like, why did this turn into a bet? And he said, $20 to sing Hatikva? He said, yeah, every word, clear as day. He said, okay. He sang every word in our kitchen, and we stood there in awe because we realized we didn't teach him that. Not because we didn't want to, because we didn't have to. We surrounded him with all of you, with a community that was going to show him what it meant to be Jewish. And an anthem of hope. Not just an anthem that we sing without thinking about our people, an anthem we sing with a promise to our people that we will be there through good and bad, today, tomorrow, and the next day, anticipating their needs. And the struggle is, how do we keep doing it? How do we keep passing it on to the next generation? Our boys are now 16, 14, and 12, and raising teenagers is hard and a struggle, and we're constantly worried, are we doing the right thing? Are they getting the message? I once heard a rabbi suggest that the reason God instructed Abraham to sacrifice Isaac when Isaac was 12 and not 13 is because at 13 it was no longer a sacrifice. There may be some truth to that. But I had my own hatikva, moment of hope. When years ago, when our oldest was becoming a bar mitzvah, he was doing his mitzvah project at the local Boys and Girls Club, a club that services inner city kids, the most needy kids. And this particular club was just a block from his private school. Every Tuesday, he would go and he would mentor these kids. He would read with them. He would play pickup basketball. He would do whatever they needed. And 3 months into his mentoring, he came to me and said, "You know, Mommy, I've been making my Hanukkah list, and I'd like to share it with you." I said, "Good, because I've been very worried that you haven't been making that list, so let's hear it." We were actually driving home from the club, and his brothers were in the back seat. He said, "Well, there's this pair of tennis shoes I want, and there's this Nintendo game, and finally I want to give back." I said, "What? What do you mean you want to give back?" He said, "Look, I've been going to the Boys and Girls Club now for 3 months, and I see how little they have, and I see how much my brothers and I have. You know, we don't worry about whether we're going to eat or have enough clothes to wear or pencils for school. Mommy, they don't have pencils." So I was wondering, can I use the money that I have gotten for Hanukkah and birthday and give it back to the Boys and Girls Club as part of my Hanukkah gift? I'm like, "Of course. You kidding me? It's like the greatest gift I could ever hear. You can give back." He said, "Well, the reason I'm really asking you is, do you think you and Daddy can match my gift?" I said, "Yes, that is not what I expected you to say, but I think Daddy and I would be happy to match your gift." Well, 10-year-old Abe was in the back seat listening to this and said, "Well, if Arthur's giving to the Boys and Girls Club, I'd like to give, and I haven't saved quite as much money as he has, but will you and Daddy match my gift too?" I said, "Yes, we now have a minivan fundraising campaign going on, and I'm loving it." And that's when they turned to 8-year-old Levi. And anybody with 3 of anything knows the third is always the ornery one. He's looking out the window, acting like he didn't hear any of it. Abe said, "Levi, are you listening? Arthur's giving to the Boys and Girls Club. I'm going to give. Mom and Dad are going to match our gift." He's like, "I don't have any money. I got nothing." He said, "Look, Hanukkah's coming up. Your birthday's around the corner. Pledge now, pay later. It'll be fine." Levi still wouldn't budge, and that's when 10-year-old Abe looked at 8-year-old Levi right in the eye and said, "Levi, can we count on your support?" And that's when I realized his story was my story. And my story is his story, in the middle, looking at the generation above him, wanting to be as great and give as much. And then also the responsibility of the generation that comes after him, wanting to inspire them to do the same. That is our story. That is why we do what we do. That is why we anticipate the needs of our global community. That is why my children know Hatikva and how to give and how to run a campaign in a minivan, because they're listening not just to me, but to all of you. And I know, just like Levi eventually did, that we can always count on your support. Thank you.